Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special gathering of Alta Journal's California Book Club. Tonight, we're going to be celebrating our fifth anniversary. And so tonight is all about you, our fellow lovers of California literature. We're just so grateful for everyone who, over the course of 5 years, has joined us, been tuning in on the third Thursday of every month. It's hard to believe that it was 5 years ago that we started this project. We've been talking about doing some kind of book club, and then when the pandemic lockdown happened, I was talking with John. We decided to give it a go via Zoom. And our first author back on October 15th, 2020 was Pam Zhang with How Much of These Hills is Gold. That was our first selection. And that night we had 229 people join us, and we were blown away. We thought this is huge. Now, 5 years later, because of your support, we've had more than 50,000 people register each month for the free California Book Club events. And multiples of that number have watched the programs that have been uploaded to YouTube. I was trying to do the math. It looks like there's 1.5 million hours worth of programs. They're free author talks, the best stuff. John Freeman interviewing, just the best California writers living. And of course, he's put those essays together in this wonderful book. And that's what we're here to celebrate tonight. It's a thrill to be here with John Freeman. And of course, the brilliant author, Walter Mosley. He's the author of more than 60 books. And the one that he doesn't really need an introduction, but I do want to call out that he was one of our first California Book Club authors, and for his novel, Devil in a Blue Dress. So he's coming back tonight with a special surprise twist that he's going to be the host. We're going to put John Freeman in the hot seat, and he'll be the one answering the questions. And so while everyone's getting settled, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Blaise Zuriga. I'm the editorial director of Alta Journal. We've got a big crowd tonight. More than 1,000 people have signed up. And so I'm going to encourage everyone to type in chat where they're zooming in from. I'm joining tonight from Bolinas, California. And while you're doing that, some housekeeping. The California Book Club is Alta Journal's free monthly gathering celebrating books that help us form a definitive guide to understanding life here in the Golden State. In the weeks leading up to each gathering, altaonline.com publishes excerpts, interviews, and essays about that month's pick. So if you haven't already done so, please check out John Freeman's fantastic essay, Why I Write. There's an excerpt from him, and also David Hewlin, a contributing editor, wrote Why You Should Read This essay. You'll find all that and more on altaonline.com. All those articles are free. They're available via the California Book Club newsletter. Comes out weekly. We also do a Monday book review, an Alta Weekly. There's Alta Live events. So much to sign up for. It's all free. Please check it out. And again, every CBC episode, CBC stands for California Book Club, every episode we've done is posted to YouTube where you can watch it. You go back there. And the California Book Club would not be possible without the amazing support of our partners, the Los Angeles Public Library, San Francisco Public Library, the Huntington USC Institute on California in the West, Book Passage, Book Soup, Camino Books, Romans, Books Inc., Green Apple Books, Bookshop West Portal, as well as Narrative Magazine and Zizava. So please support our partners, support our authors. Go visit these indie bookstores. Support Heyday, the publisher of John's book. Go get Walter's books. He's just concluding a book tour himself. And again, check us out, altaonline.com. All this information's there. And you too can support us to make these events possible by subscribing to Alta, becoming a member. You'll receive 4 copies of this big, beautiful, oversized, award-winning publication. We have a special book section, as well as the essays by the authors I was just mentioning. So here's John Freeman's essay, Why I Write. Months ahead, we're going to have the former poet laureate, Ada Limon, as well as Lisa C. So that's going to be later this fall. And if you subscribe today for $50, you get those issues, unlimited online access. It's ad-free, as well as, of course, this copy of John's book, which is a $30 value. So please consider joining. There'll be links in the chat, and you can always visit our site. Also, John is embarking on an ambitious book tour. He's got an appointment later tonight, even, with dozens of appearances up and down the coast, across the country, you name it. He's barnstorming. And for those in the Bay Area, please join us for a special in-person event at the Verdi Club. It's part of Litquake, the big festival happening now in San Francisco. That event's taking place on October 22nd at 7 p.m. John will be on stage with author Rebecca Solnit, also a California Book Club author, and famed City Lights book buyer Paul Yamazaki, who also happens to be on the book club selection panel. So please check that out. There'll be a sign-up link in the chat, and we'll send an email tomorrow with all that good information. So all that and more at altaonline.com. And so now I'd just like to please let me turn this very, very special edition of the California Book Club over to Walter and John. Walter, over to you, sir.
Hello. Thanks a lot. It's great to be here again, I guess, and to talk to John. This is the thing. John Freeman, it's amazing that I like John, because, I get jealous, and he's so he's a wonderful writer. He's a wonderful editor. He supports writers. He wants to be there, and he wants to help writers. He's unbearably handsome. He's incredibly nice. It's like everything you think about John. It's just and he does so many things, and he does them all well, and with grace. And so when I was asked to do this tonight, I'm a little nervous, because even though John, when you talk to him, is just this very sweet guy who's doesn't try to talk over you or do anything like that, but when you read him, you say, God, this guy's so smart. What am I gonna do now? So anyway, he's a great guy, John Freeman. You can come on too, John.
Oh, Walter, you're handsome too, Devil.
Ah,
Devil in a black. Well, I like that in your new book. Easy Rollins is sort of older, but he's 52, and I'm about 1 year shy of that. So I'm feeling it's nice to be called handsome by you.
Well, you're everybody loves you, John, and I think that's a great thing. And I'm really happy to be part of talking to you about this extraordinary book. Just because there's a lot of times there are essays, and you really don't know why the essays are kind of appearing together, or how they all work with each other. But you know what you're doing. You're doing the journey through the Golden State's new literature, which you included me, so it's not that new. But I know what you meant when you said it. And I want to get right into this, because you have to go, and I want to ask you some questions, and then I want to be able to go to the audience and see what they want to ask you. The first question I want to ask you, this is just one of the things that I found really powerful about your book, is the incredible range of it. And the way that you talk about it, the way you talk about these books, I feel like this is the number of books is just like the tip of the iceberg. And I want to know, how much do you read? I know that sounds like a dumb question, but how much do you read?
Probably around as much as you do. You were a bookish kid growing up, probably read a couple books a week. And I don't have kids. I don't have a lot of hobbies, but I have this overwhelming passion to read things. And in the life that I've had, I've been lucky enough just to be given books to read for free. I'm still getting over that fact, sort of 30 years into my life working on books. A book comes in the mail, and I think, do I have to give this back? You know? So in my life as an editor, I probably read at least a couple books a week for work, for submission. And then there's the one I'm reading closely, which is the one I'm editing. And then once a month, I'm reading for this club, and sometimes that involves more than one book, because some
More
people
like 8 books a week. Yes, I mean 8 books
yeah,
a month,
it's a lot. It's sort of
or 16.
multiverse. You can live in the multiverse if you read. That's the thing that no one tells you. You don't have to follow Brian Greene or learn quantum physics. It's right there in the library. You can just go in and start doing it.
But John, a lot of times when I'm talking to people about like a person will come up to me and they said, I read War and Peace. And I went, well, yeah, how many times have you read War and Peace? And they go, well, once. I said, well, you can't really get it reading, a great book once, even if it's a tiny little book like The Stranger or something like that. And I always have the feeling when talking to you and also when reading you that you have this really deep understanding of what you're reading, and you bring it to us in such a way that you talk to me about a book I've never read before, but when I finish reading, that article, I feel like I just read it 5 times. You know what I'm saying?
That's the nicest thing you could possibly say. I mean, I feel like my job or my calling as a critic is not just simply to put things in context, but to describe the experience of reading a book as closely as possible to the experience so that you feel like it's your experience too. And I sometimes, there's the cultural aspect of that where you can read the book review and then go to a party and talk about books you haven't read. But really, what I'm trying to do is bring people into the anteroom of the reading experience. The tip
Yeah.
of, bring people in and say, this is what it's like to be inside this book or inside this person's body of work, and these are the questions they're asking. This is what the air smells like. This is how many windows are open. This is how many mirrors there are, and that's a really fun task as a writer, because the writer that I'm reading gives me all the material. They give me the images, they give me the central metaphors, they give me the characters. And if you just simply listen a little bit, like I love the way that Easy Rawlins talks, and I love the way that you capture the varieties of languages spoken in LA. And if you pick well when you're quoting inside of an essay, it's like you can kind of bring even more people into the room with the writer and the reader that you're sort of inviting into this experience.
Well, you're really good at that stuff. And again, I'm not jealous. I was just like, wow, he's really good at this. Let him do that. Uh, I want to say a few things about your book. Just that what I think is that it's so, well, in a way, I think it's kind of muscular. Not really strong or overpowering or anything like that. But I think that you like, it's like a well exercised body. The first thing about this book is it is most definitely an intellectual memoir. You give us a lot about yourself, in the introduction, in the articles themselves. We're learning about the writer of the book. We're learning about the book. We're learning about you, and I just think that's, I mean, it's really extraordinary because you do it kind of flawlessly. It's just there, and I really love that part about your book. The other thing about it is that it's a political history of California in its own way. It's just, and not one where you're saying, well, this happened and that happened and this happened. You do that some, but mostly this is what these books touch. This is what these authors touch. This is how they're dealing with the world. And finally, I think it's a really, if you pay attention, it's a literary tool where you can examine yourself in whatever place you're in. You don't have to be in California, and you also examine your own culture. And I just want to say that to you because I think that it's so strong and it has a voice, and that's what's so important, when you're reading or when you're writing, is to have a voice, to have somebody to recognize who you are. Do you think that's true,
Well, this
sir?
is incredibly flattering for you to say all these things, and I'm really grateful you read the book this way, because to me, reading is a very personal experience. And yet, as a critic, when you start out, at least when I started out, I felt like I had to somehow channel and fabricate this authorial voice, which was as objective as possible. You know,
Hmm.
that as close to a 60-year-old AI bot um, as, as possible. And so when I still recall meeting one of my first editors in New York when I was about 24, and she thought I was probably in my mid 60s because I wrote like a 60-year-old, and it took me another 2.5 decades to sound like myself. And that's one of the things I admire so much in the writers that I read is when you read someone on the page who sort of found their voice. And I think it's remarkable. Like I know you probably wrote books before Devil in a Blue Dress, but you hear it the first time and you think that's that person's voice, even if they're speaking through the voice of another or a character. And when you're writing criticism the way I am, there's not really a character to be speaking through. And I'm averse to creating myself as a character. There are critics who kind of have an outsized place in, what they're telling you, and they are a big part of the story and character-wise and just temperament-wise that I feel kind of allergic to that. But I know that you can't tell people a lot of information, from from the shadows. You kind of have to step forward and reveal things and talk about things and place yourself. And what I like about California literature is that it's constantly inviting us into multiple spaces. The best books that are out there now that are being published and that have been published in the last 50 years are finally inviting us into all the different multitudes of what California is, the landscapes, the towns, the cities, the small villages. I passed through Watsonville on the way here to Santa Cruz, and Jaime Cortez's Gordo. Now Watsonville has its great book, and everyone can come to Watsonville. And so as a guide to this, I feel like you have to be a little bit energetic. And because I'm using the same tools that the writers are using, I feel like I have to be not enthusiastic because but I have to try to write to the same level that the writers I'm writing with are. And that's very difficult when it's you and Maxine Hong Kingston and, you know, um, Rachel Kushner and Natalie Diaz. But that's what's exciting is to try to say um, that the how we talk about literature is not as important as the literature itself, but it makes other things possible.
Well,
And
I think it might be. I might be. I think it might be as important. And I know you're never going to say, "Well, yeah, I am all those things." But I'm telling the audience that you are, and I'm sure most of them already know that. But that's okay. Uh, Another part of this is you grew up in California reading all sorts of books that were available to you at the time, books that didn't include many of the writers that come from the varied cultural corners of the state. You say that California has always struggled to see itself. I found that statement very interesting, and I was wondering, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? I know what it means to me, but
I think California culturally, not so much the movies, obviously, but and when it comes to how to narrate and tell stories, it feels like the California I grew up in believed literature came from somewhere else, which is an absurd
mhm,
statement to come from a state which, by the time I was in high school, you had already long been publishing books, but also Raymond Chandler and Maxine Hong
mhm,
King, Luis Rodriguez, and Amy Tan, and so many. Nathaniel West, the club doesn't include writers who are no longer alive, but I think we would have definitely read some of his work.
mhm.
And instead, I read writers from the East Coast. I read English writers. I read French writers. I read the Cavalier poets, for God's sakes. I read Gilgamesh. And I was lucky in that my English teachers basically sent me through, a quality of education that would have rivaled at a public school, probably most East Coast prep schools. I had some really great English teachers, but for some reason they just didn't see California as worthy of literature, or California literature as worthy of being within the same realm of literature as they felt like we were meant to be studying. And I
Yeah.
think just this book is my counter argument that that is ridiculous, and I think it's ridiculous on many different levels in poetry, historical fiction, history, memoir, crime fiction. The categories aren't necessarily as important as the breadth of the writers, where they come from, and how they sound.
Yeah, I mean, it's even there's even a lot of I mean, to use the word I would use for it is prejudice in the in the genres themselves. Who can write a mystery? Who could write a romance? Who even there, it's like, well, there's certain people who write it, and you say, but there are all these other people who write it. They're writing it. People are reading it. What? Why aren't you looking at it? I mean, it's all. I think you always have that to have that broad view of what literature is just extraordinary. And it's hard because if you concentrate on one thing, then that becomes really good. But forgetting that, I want to ask you another question, which is I think that everybody has gone through it. And so I know that part of you writing this book had to do with the COVID shutdown. And I want to know how you saw, COVID as an important event in many things, but also in you creating this book.
Well, the conversations are at the core of the book, because I wouldn't have written the book were it not for the conversations, and I wouldn't have written the essays that I did were I not to have had those conversations, because my
Hmm.
essays, they came out in Alta online, but they were expanded by reflecting on the conversations I had. The piece I wrote, for example, about Devil in a Blue Dress was originally 550 words, and the one in the book is 2,500 words. And it grew in part because of what I learned in the course of talking to you, and over the last 4 years of talking to other writers. And
Hmm.
um, I think when COVID happened, I don't know how people in the audience feel, but I was both acutely aware of where I was, but I also immediately started to rearrange every piece of ephemera and family heirlooms and even my yearbooks. I started flipping through my yearbooks thinking, like, who am I? Where am I? Where was I from? And I started looking around at this stuff, and I thought, I am from California. I obviously know that, but there is a kind of there was a kind of vortex that happened in that time period. And it was very comforting to get online and talk to other people from California, writing about California, kind of inventing the dreamscape, if you will, that we live in. And it was only possible. It was probably one of the only good things in my life to come out of COVID was this incredible club, and how
Hmm.
deep we can get into books in just an hour. Um,
Hmm.
how incredibly accessible people are. I mean, most people on this Zoom, to see you prior to COVID, would have had to be lucky enough to be in LA or a number of cities where you're coming to visit, and or maybe somebody taped it and put it up on YouTube.
Hmm.
Um, and I still remember going to events. I saw Saul Bellow and Ralph Ellison at an event in New York City in the mid 1990s, and half the time I was sitting there thinking, they're right there. The people that wrote those books I love, they're right there, and they're thinking and they're talking and telling stories right in front of me. I still have that feeling when I'm on Zoom and I'm listening to people telling stories about what it is they do and why they write. But now everybody can come because this is free.
I do remember, like in New York, when going to things, Susan Sontag interviewing Chinua Achebe, or Amiri Baraka being interviewed by Allen Ginsberg, and it's just it's I mean, the brilliance of the when you get to somebody who's made such a commitment to the work, which I think is a big thing about your book, talking about that commitment, not directly, but kind of like by looking at the world around. Just to to keep up in this book, you have a structure. early myths, arrivals and migrations, building cities, of landscape and love, law and order, how we sound, the state of poetry, exploding fantasy, fantasies, right? Fantasies, yes. The suburbs, digital dystopias, ruptures, and who's a citizen. And I just want to know, I want to know what you think about that organization that you created for this book.
Well, in the beginning, I thought I would just do it in the order in which the books came. And then I realized that the books were circling certain themes, and that certain themes had to do with the origins of California as a state, with California history, with what it says it is, and actually what happened. And I realized over the course of the last couple of years that some of my favorite California books, the books that are in this club, are basically rewriting the misinformation that's often traveled along the airways under the guise of myth and fantasies that are promoted to some degree from the biggest cultural arm in the world, which is the movie industry. But it comes in other ways. And what I loved about the books is just how creative and authoritative they were in demolishing some of those myths. And growing up in California, not reading a lot of California literature because it wasn't taught. Yeah, we had Steinbeck. There was an occasional Jack London story. But we did the Mission Project, and the Mission Project was help as when you're 10 years old, you're making this paper mache mission and putting little Native American people and paterfamilias fathers in this little diorama. It doesn't teach you anything about, the colonial history of California, other than the buildings they used. It actually teaches you a lot of mistruths about exactly, what that experience was like, what the consequences of it were, how devastating it was culturally, emotionally, and to the health of native populations in California. And so I wanted to sort of arrange the books in the kind of historical order to some degree, but also in the kind of into an arc of like the myths that they were approaching, the real history that they were addressing, and move towards the questions that we live with now as a result of what California has been from the beginning, and the questions it still has to keep asking itself. They're not resolvable, but it has to keep asking those questions. And I think when it's healthiest as a state and our literature is in its best form, it's asking those questions in lots of different ways.
Yeah. When I'm listening to you, John, and when we're talking about anything, I'm always made so, and I was really aware of that going through this book where the first thing that makes you different than most writers that I know is that you really love writers. And it's not like you love, Shakespeare and, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and, it's not that. You love writers, I think. And the other thing that I think is I think you also love readers, maybe very much in the same way. And there's just been something that I've been thinking, and certainly when I was reading your book, it made me think it more, that the thing that's so beautiful about writing is that the reader is as creative as the original writer. Because, we're looking at a page, it's a white page with black letters written across it, and we just see amazing things. People, spring to life. They have languages, they have sound. There's the city, there's the smells, there's the, all of that stuff going on, and that's what readers do. Without readers, we writers wouldn't really be very much, actually. But our work and other people's works are created and recreated and are, something like the story, but also something different, like the reader. And I love that. I mean, I'm just saying that, but I think that when I'm talking to you, I feel that I feel that much larger world. You know, like when you say one of the chapters that you have is how we sound, and it's deceptively simple. But it's a celebration of music and the language that we use in our daily lives, and how the writer captures that sound, that feeling, even the timbre of that in your work. I think you do it in your work, and I think that you're trying to underscore it in this piece. Do you think anything about that?
Well, I think we all need forms of celebration and ceremony in our daily lives, even if we're not believers, you know? And I think even if we're thinking about hard things, we can deal with that by doing this strange thing, which is looking at sort of marks on a page and
Mm.
ritualizing kind of to some degree what it is we are. And one of the reasons I think everyone on this call and you and me both love writers so much is that they're kind of like our secularish, but sometimes not secular priests or holy people. They come in and they
Mhm.
say, "All right, one of the things I love about your work, Walter, is it's so polished, it's so lean. I mean, here's one opening from White Butterfly of a chapter. It was a warm evening. I parked toward the end of my block. Zeppo and Raphael were gone. The cardboard box that Raphael had used for his table was flattened on the sidewalk. A dollop of blood festooned by a cracked tooth adorned the curb. Somebody had learned a bitter lesson in Raphael Johnson's school of sleight of hand." I mean, that could be a piece of flash fiction, I'm there, I know exactly what kind of evening that is. I know exactly what it's like to come across the site of a kind of altercation. Through the point of view, you've got, exactly what kind of mind is watching this. And then there's the tooth. Yeah, the tooth. And I think, we need to kind of hear how we sound, not to create senses of, self-consciousness. But, you go into any place of worship, there's always a thing where you do call and response, or the congregation or whatever talks together. A concert is so amazing, because occasionally the person stops singing and then they let the audience kind of carry the song. And I think we need those things to feel like we're in a world that's together, and because there's a lot of things telling us we shouldn't be together, and that we're the things that really the things that divide us are are tantamount, and that
Mhm.
they will keep us apart. And I think with literature, it's so strange because you wrote this book particularly over 30 years ago, and here it is sitting on a table, and it still sounds new. It's the record hasn't scratched, and it can
Hmm.
still reach someone, and it can still make me feel like I'm in a shared space with you, with Easy, with the people who live on that street. And to me, that's kind of magic.
And and that, I mean, even though I think that you denied it a little bit, I think that that's exactly what I'm saying about when it's reading you. That one of the pleasures of this book, your book, is reading alongside you, seeing how you experience the different authors, language, and storytelling. And there seems to be something more going on. It feels like you're also teaching your readers something about reading itself. What do you think?
I mean, uh, I think I'm learning in front of you, and that's the thing that is kind of electrifying, but also kind of terrifying as a critic. If and I think that's why critics create the armor that they often have, is so they can speak from on high and not basically reveal the fact that they are probably also terrified about making a mistake and about being wrong. But I think it's much more effective and more interesting to say, let's listen together to what these characters are saying. One of my favorite books of the last 10 years is Elaine Castillo's America's Not the Heart. And there are so many different ways of speaking in that book. There are multiple languages that I had not heard publicly, and I had also not seen written in a book. And so one of the ways that's writing about that book was challenging was like how to slowly stage the introduction of those languages and into a piece that I couldn't presume that everybody reading had familiarity with. And I think, you know, we live in a world where so much of what we are, you know, can be flattened into your nationality, your gender, you know, where you live, etc. And a place as multifaceted as all the geographies, all the languages, all the different people as California is an exhilarating place to live. And I think my job as a writer is writing about California is to kind of open up the window and let people hear what sounds are coming out of this place, you know, in its literature. And part of doing that is, you know, basically saying that I'm learning it too, you know, come learn it with me, and not say from the get-go, I know all this stuff, you know, because I don't.
Well, nobody does, right? I mean,
only God does if God exists.
yeah, well, you know, and maybe not even they. I mean, trying to not give God a gender. It's you know, because of it's there's so much. Why would you know everything? You know, I mean, it's a funny idea that, you know, that because everything is connected, but so you know everything like that, you know, but you know, you could even be the great deity and be, you know, oh, really? He did? Oh, I didn't know that. Huh. You know, it actually sounds kind of wonderful and human, but, you know,
well,
maybe.
you know, you once, I remember we had a coffee or something in LA, and you were like, I'm gonna write it was I don't know if you were taking the piss, but it was like, I'm writing a series of 29 novels about 29 centuries, or it was something so broad. I thought, oh my God, like Walter has like gone planetarium scale in the in the writing life. And you know, I think that one of the things that's great about literature is the author can give you the scale. Um, Here's an example, like Annie Proulx wrote that book, Barkskins. You know, it takes place over about 700 years, and it goes back and forth between sort of people who were cutting down trees and people who were getting them to the mill or something like that. And each chapter is about 50 to 80 years, and everyone you meet in that chapter dies. And then the book starts over, and you have a whole new set of people. And I thought, I've never read a book like this where basically at the end of every chapter, the author kills everyone off and then somehow manages to keep you going. But the reason I bring this up is that all books create, they all have a context. You know, every one of your novels is set within a perfect, you know, the new one's 72. You know, I think you started in 53 or 50, you know, or so. And you have a city, you have a space, you have a group of people. And it's with writing about literature, there is this kind of sense that you could bring, you have to do the same thing, actually. Like when I talk about a book and in one of the essays in the California Book Club, I have to say, all right, you know, we're gonna look at this time period. We're gonna bring it down to this place. And so there are similar decision-making skills being made. And that's the way I think that literature and talking about literature ultimately forces us to talk about our histories as a state. You know, and so much of our history is not taught in California. It's not shared, and it's not broadcast out, because it's almost as if it's this other place that doesn't really factor into the United States.
Well, I mean, I agree with you so strongly with that there's, you know, there's always, not always, but most often there's a dominant culture, whatever that is. You know, there's a dominant culture that identifies itself according to some, you know, some rules. And if you're not in that dominant culture, if you're in one of the, you know, the subcultures that are moving around, you know, race or gender or age or whatever it is, if you're not in the literature, if you're in the subculture and you're not in the literature, then you don't exist. Because nobody's going to be reading books of history. They're going to be, they're reading books, they're watching movies, they're listening to stories being told, and that's why that's who exists in their mind.
Well, and I think
really important. Go on.
You can, but what counts as history is what's so fantastic about literature, because a book like R.L.'s Dream might be read to understand history in the future, because consciousness is also a record of history. And so, there is this period, or like growing up, I always thought that to understand history, you would have to have this kind of documentary lens, moving with a steady cam, training my eye on things that are outside of me. And one of the things that's so compelling and powerful about literature and fiction, poetry, and the rest, is it can bring you in, and it can make you the character, and it can make you look out at the thing that, as the reader and the character, at the world around you, and you can be the one being looked at. You can be the spectacle,
and it opens your imagination. Because something doesn't have to be true to make you rethink the world you're living in. According to your own rules. Now, I'm going to ask you one more question because we want to get to the audience, and I have to figure out how to find those questions. So I just want to ask you this one last thing, that the end of the book, in the chapter called "Who is a Citizen," is this remarkable essay by Amy Tan, about Amy Tan's book, when she wants to learn how to draw, and exploring that by first observing birds in her backyard, both in fledgling sketches and then in journal accounts. You say that this project changed her writing, that her writing about those drawing those birds in her backyard, changed her writing. Like, the subject changed the writing. And I just want to know a little of what you meant by that.
Well, the book that Walter's talking about, if you haven't read it or gone to the club, is basically a condensed version of Amy Tan's journal of bird watching, which began long before COVID, but in the course of the evolution of her bird watching, she decided she wanted to draw birds, and then it became a chronicle of her learning to draw birds. And as she's chronicling drawing birds, she starts to describe their behavior, and she describes the observation effect on her as well as on them, but mostly it's on her. And so this book, which is about observing birds, is also a book about observing herself and observing her place in the world. And it slowly manages to sort of move the human to the side of the picture. It's no longer dead center in the center of the picture. And you get this sense that opens up, and I don't want to be too metaphysical about it, but that the ecstasies and kind of concentration-based euphoria of studying a natural thing closely and observing why it does what it does, and knowing too that you will not understand it, it creates a new and deeper sense, I think, with her work, of mystery. Amy Tan's an amazing observer. She has been from the very beginning. Anyone who's read Joy Luck Club knows that observation was kind of one of her most brutal powers. You get the sense of, in one of those chapters of that book, of that sort of young girl who's a chess prodigy, I think, learning to play chess, but she's really watching her mother, and she comes down with these sort of terrible observations about what it means to her mother to have this brilliant kid. I think Amy Tan's work over time is full of these great characterizations of people, and she does work from the outside in. She sort of has that Dickensian quality. But what I see in the new book, the birding book, is this sense that the world has mysteries that cannot be observed, and that feeling, is actually perhaps what connects us between each other, and also between ourselves as humans and the natural world. And that kind of opens up whole new possibilities about what to do with a novel. How do you reflect the space of not knowing, and how do you reflect, the anxiety of no longer being the sort of main character in the Earth's story, even if you're, taking part in trying to keep it alive.
Mm. I'm actually, thank you for that. I mean, I'm really loving like her writing these really, really, really long sentences, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden she's writing about hummingbirds, so her sentences get really short. It's like I love that. It's just like, because so many people, so many writers think that what they know is something special. When I say special, not part of a general kind of sharing, but the truth is, when you start to write, a lot of things happen that you don't know what's happening, and if you're good at that, then you can write well, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it has to be born out of not knowing. Otherwise, you're just simply completing an assignment, or it's a document, not a sort of creation.
Yeah, 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 right. I mean, it's kind of like everything is a journal in a way.
Mm.
Excuse me, I'm trying to figure out how to get these questions, and Beth tells me that they're somewhere, but I'm not finding them, and I'm wondering if she might be able to help me
I'm
here.
happy to ask them on your behalf, Walter.
Hey, that's great.
Hey.
God is here. God is actually alive. It's
God is not alive, but Beth is here. Hi, everyone. I've got questions for both of you. There's so many questions and so many people here from all over the world, in fact. Greetings from Brazil. I've been researching about SoCal literature in graduate school, so it's a pleasure listening to both of you tonight.
Wow.
My question to Mr. Freeman, how do you think this new generation of writers covered in your book deals with the legacy of noir style that is so productive in the state of the 20th century?
That's a great question. I love noir writing, and I edited a book of Sacramento noir.
Yeah.
And Walter, you should weigh in on this, because I think originally noir had some very restrictive forms. It was about a world in which justice wasn't possible, in which the person, prosecuting or investigating a crime was flawed themselves, and it had dark atmospheric effects, usually a bit of rain and some drinking, but also dangerous dames, sometimes a murdered girl or murdered woman. And certain aspects of that, they're pretty dated. They're kind of sexist, and it also presumes that one person's experience, if you will, can matter, or one person can fix, or if not, get to the bottom of why a crime occurred. And I think now you have to look at people like Steph Cha, not really a noir writer, but wrote PI books. And then her book, Your House Will Pay, touches on some of the areas where noir was written, and instead sort of shows you, when you drop some of those elements of noir and let a few more new ones in, that you get a much more prismatic picture of a place. That actually, what was so rainy about noir was actually the confinement of being in the head of that rainy dude, and noir can actually, I think, expand to include things that look a bit more outward, that have about people of different backgrounds, and that also have crimes that have to do a little bit more with justice and what's being done to groups of people rather than individuals. I don't know. What do you think, Walter?
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, just to begin with, noir is a film term. Like, it really isn't about books, but that's okay, because things move back and forth. But second thing is that it starts off, I think the great writers are still great writers. But but the notion that what was informing the writing was a kind of an existentialism, where there's a person, they don't have anything, they don't have a house, they don't have a job, they don't have a car, they don't have a kid, they don't have a dog, they don't have anything, and so they can devote their whole life to doing what they think is right. And you can have that in Hemingway, and you can have that in Hammett, and you can have that in Camus. I mean, there are all these different people writing like that, and they're not all writing, mystery novels or crime novels, though there's almost always a crime somewhere. And that's the thing, and the thing is that we've opened up the genre over time. The mystery writers, they've opened it up and made a difference, and that's what I find so. It's not like that we're better or that our work can address more. It's that we've evolved into something else, dealing with other issues.
All right, moving on. Peggy asks, for both of you, what is in your reading queue right now? John, we'll start with you.
That's a really good question. I'm on the road, and so I'm actually rereading this right now because in 2 weeks I'll be in Vancouver talking to Walter. I'll be the one asking the questions. And one of the things I really love about rereading is how you end up rereading yourself, a little bit. I don't know, Walter, if you feel this way, but when I reread a book, when I reread The Stranger for the first time, I thought, what did I read the first time? I had that whole scene where he sits by the water for like a whole day and looks outside, and the book just describes the changing color. I thought, my God, that like I don't remember anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone back and I've reread some of my favorite California books, and some of them have held up really well. Gary Snyder, we read, for the book club, and that was just I was in heaven. But I also realized how much more his books were trying to lead you to action, to not just change the frame of what you were thinking, but lead you to greater stewardship. And I think that's one thing I really miss, when I don't get a chance to reread things, is because I feel like it's very possible that if we just kept going back and back and back to things, we would get more out of them.
Well, listen, when you talk to somebody who's like, teaching you how to write, or, talking to you about your book, rewriting is writing. Writing is not writing. Rewriting is writing. The same thing is true about reading. Rereading is reading. I'm working so much on things that I'm trying to write right now. I'm doing some, film stuff, and I'm doing some fiction, and I'm writing some short stories, and it's fun, but I'm too busy. But if I were going to reread anybody right now, it would probably be Roger Zelazny, Lord of Light. He's like this great writer, but because he writes in this genre that's comprised of the smartest writers, science fiction, nobody really knows him. They knew him when he was writing, 30 years ago, but they don't know him now. And and it's just, and when I read it, I read those sentences and I go, like, this guy, he's like, if I was a shark, I would be in love with that shark, because he's so good, damn.
Wow. Okay. We've got another question for both of you. Nick asks, I'd like to hear from both Walter and John. When a writer starts a story, should the writer outline and know the ending before starting? To paraphrase Hemingway, if the writer doesn't know what happens next, neither will the reader.
You want me to go first, Johnny? Because I know you've been going first always. I always say to any writer who tells me that they know the whole story, I say, a novel is bigger than your head. If you have the whole novel in your head, it's not a novel. And I remember once talking to Roy Lichtenstein about painting. I asked him, I said, so Roy, how do you know something is art? He says, I don't know what is art, but I can tell you what's not art. And I said, what's that? He said, if you know a painter who knows what they're going to paint exactly before they get to the canvas, that's not art. And I believe, I mean, you can have outlines, you can have an idea of what the ending's going to be, you can have all that stuff, but all that has to be vulnerable to change. And if it's not, I think I'll end it there.
John?
Yeah, I'm sort of anti-outline myself, in part because life doesn't have an outline. You know, you make an outline, life then laughs at you. And I think if you want your characters to feel like they're living inside a life, you knowing in advance what's going to happen to them will eventually, I think, filter into what you're doing. It's quite messier though. And you know, later tonight I'm talking to Karen Tei Yamashita and her about her great book, among others, I Hotel, you know, which is 9 or 10 novellas, and you know, each one comes with a sort of diagram at the beginning of it, and they're mapped onto various themes which he plays with, and you know, it's an incredibly sophisticated piece of narrative machinery, and I don't see in any way how that book would have been made without at some point her stepping back and making a very, very detailed outline. Or to mention another California Book Club book, Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown. You know, the immense nimbleness of that book, of moving between the character who is sort of caught within a film script, which is unfolding, but which also has, you know, recognized him, if you will, with there being a story outside of that. I think that would have to be plotted out a little bit, you know, because otherwise it probably would have grown and become unwieldy. And when you're doing that kind of that really sophisticated unfolding of an aspect of conception within the story, I think you eventually have to sort of even create a thematic outline. But you know, the best thing to read about this is probably this book. This year you write your book, or this year you write your novel.
Oh, this year you write your novel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I read that and I thought, okay, I'll read this book in 10 years and then I'll write my novel, because it actually makes it feel like something you can do and you can build. And it does take work. Outlines help, but you know, I honestly, I think everyone's different.
All right, let's do 2 more questions.
Okay.
Mary asks, not to be a bummer, but we hear a lot about how most books don't sell. I've heard that if you sell 5,000 copies of a book, that's considered a success. It used to be 100,000. What words of inspiration can you 2 brilliant storytellers give to those of us, despite this, who still want to write a book?
Writing a book is a labor of love. And I think everybody should try to write a novel. I mean, everybody. It used to be that not so many books got published, and so a lot more got sold. It used to be that people read more, and so that more books got bought. Though I think a lot of books get bought today. If you want to make money, you should be in real estate. And the thing is that you can be in real estate and still write a novel. So it's not a problem. If there's possibility of you having great success, or someone having great success and make a lot of money, and that would be really great and wonderful. You know, maybe not be your book, it might be the movie made from your book, or it might be, you know, translations, or you know, something else, awards. But writing the book and thinking, well, if it doesn't sell, it's not worth writing, then yeah, I guess it's not worth writing.
John?
Yeah, you never know what's going to sell. You know, I'm lucky enough to work where I work, and one of the books that we are, I think, ennobled by having published is Maxine Hong Kingston's first book, The Woman Warrior. And when I think about the miraculousness of that book, of her finishing it in Hawaii and printing out a manuscript, and I think she sent her only manuscript by the mail to Knopf, and then sitting around and waiting for 4 or 5 months for a decision to be made. And then that book coming out, and it did win awards and it got amazing reviews. But it took a while for that book to sell, because it is such a remaking of how a story is told. And if you're out there and you're listening and you're writing in your own particular way, you have to, I think, protect yourself to have other jobs and other ways of earning an income, so that you can protect your moonlit hours or your early morning dawn hours, when you write best, and you can do the hard work that is meaningful, that you want to do. Because Walter's right, like it's a lot easier to make money selling real estate, and sometimes it's hard to make money selling real estate.
That's true too.
All right, last question, and then I'm going to get lost and leave it to Walter to wrap up. David asks, what corners of California life and history would you say are still undercovered in the state's best fiction?
That's a John question. He wrote the book about California literature.
What hasn't been covered by California fiction? There's got to be corners of California pockets.
Well, almost everything has not been covered. I mean, this is the thing. Like when I started writing, I said, well, I'm going to write about a Black detective. Everybody's like, oh my God, a Black detective. I'm going to write about. I mean, when you take if you take a specific point of view, that's going to be new. It will be. I mean, I know that question is a little bit more political, and maybe social, cultural. But the thing is that a person who says, I am going to write this book about this that I know or want to know, it's going to be original. I mean, because I think that's the word, I think it's going to be original.
Yeah, I agree with Walter. I think the infiniteness of experience and the varieties of voice that can emerge just within one language, or one language informed by others, is one of the things that makes me the most hopeful. I bet just talking to this small group of people, that someone there knows two people who fell in love and had a summer romance in Lake Tahoe, and lived to tell the tale, and maybe 30 years passed and they went back to Tahoe and they saw that person again. But as far as I know, no one's written that novel. And I think there's just the huge amount of experience that is not narrated and not turned into art. We could have another 4,000 to 5,000 years of human history and not have the novels to catch up with what people have lived. But there are writers out there trying, and that also makes me hopeful.
Yeah.
All right, I adore you both. Walter, I'm going to let you take.
Well, listen, listen. Thank you, John, and Nicole, wherever you are, that for like just for writing this book, and for being here, and for being available, and for I don't know. It always feels to me, you might be tricking me, but it always feels to me that you're working from your heart, and I think that this book, this magazine, this monthly reading or talk or whatever is it's like the best, and I really appreciate it, and I love it that we have so many people here to hear about your book and you, and that's all I can say.
Well, it means the world that you did this conversation, and I feel incredibly lucky to know you and to have read so many of your books, and to be talking to you soon. It's thank you, Walter.
Wow.
And thank you, Blaze. You're gonna take us home, right?
Yeah, but I mean, first I want to say thank you. I mean, what a way to celebrate our 5th anniversary. I mean, this is just great. You've both been so generous and gracious with your time. It was a real treat to watch both of you make each other blush. A couple of people noticed that in the chat. That was terrific. And of course, the memorable line of Walter's Gone Planetarium. That's going to go viral, And John, you've gone planetarium with this very, very, handsome book that's published by Heyday. So congratulations, and and big thanks to everyone for who's joined us over the past 5 years, and thank you, of course, too, to all the authors who've so generously given us their time. Writers like Percival Everett, Natalie Diaz, Tommy Orange, Michael Connelly, Julie Otsuka, that's just to name a few of the 60 authors. You can read John's insights about them in this book. We all need more California literature. Somebody said that they've already put this book on reserve at their local library. So others should go do that. Check it out. Visit an indie, your local indie, buy a copy. Or perhaps, please consider joining Alta, becoming a member and getting, 4 issues of the magazine and also this beautiful book. I'll keep holding it up, right? It's all on altaonline.com. You just click to subscribe. Everyone's going to receive a thank you note in tomorrow's email with links to all the topics and books that were mentioned, recommendations, including, of course, Walter's this year is when you write your novel, which I think my daughter had that book in high school. They're using that at her high school. So fantastic. And then be sure to join us next month on November 20th. John Freeman will speak with Poet Laureate Ada Limon about her new collection, Startlement. And one last reminder that next week during Litquake in San Francisco at the Verdi Club at 7:30 p.m. Wednesday, October 22nd at 7:30 p.m. John will be on stage with Rebecca Solnit and City Lights Paul Yamazaki. So finally, appreciate if you, for those, we're going to end in 1 minute. There'll be a survey popping up. If you could click that out and let us know your thoughts on tonight's program, we'd be very grateful. And we're just so grateful again. This is everyone at Alta, I know that I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. We're so thrilled to be here with you, Walter and John. It's been a terrific 5 years. It's the highlight of all of our months. And everyone who's joined us, thank you so much, because you've made this possible. So that's it. So stay well, everyone. We'll see you next month. And here's to 5 more years.
Right.